Well, good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and we're delighted to have you with us today. The election of Joe Biden opens a window of opportunity to renew constructive dialogue on improving European-U.S. trade relations. Even before assuming the role of Secretary of State, Antony Blinken said that one of the first steps to be taken by the Biden administration would be to end the, quote, artificial trade war between Europe and the United States. In the first 100 days, we've seen signs of this intent in action, but more needs to be done. And Germany can play a critical role in further strengthening the transatlantic economy. Last month, AmCham Germany published a position paper on what a new agenda for the transatlantic trade and investment partnership can look like. And earlier this month, it also released its annual Transatlantic Business Barometer. I'm delighted to welcome Daniel Andrich, the newly minted general manager of AmCham Germany, to share the findings of these two publications. Before assuming his current role, Daniel Andrich served as president and chief executive officer of the Representative of German Industry and Trade, RGIT, in Washington, D.C. In that position, he promoted transatlantic economic relations and represented the interests of German businesses in the U.S. Prior to that, he worked for the Federation of German Industries, or the BDE. Based on these experiences, he is well suited to provide an assessment of how Europe and the United States can work together to craft a new agenda for transatlantic trade and investment. Daniel, herzlich willkommen. It is great to see you. My only regret is that we're not meeting in person, but it is good to see you, and I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. Before you dive into your presentation of these two publications that AmCham Germany just put out, perhaps it makes sense for you to say a sentence or two about AmCham Germany and what you do, how you do it, so that people have some context for your remarks today.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you to the American Council on Germany for having me today. This is a great opportunity for me to continue the cooperation we had, Steve, both you and I, but also ACG and my former organization in Washington, D.C., clearly with the same focus and mission to foster transatlantic relations and understanding on both sides of the Atlantic. So I really enjoy the moment here and picking up this great cooperation we had back in the U.S. Now in my new role here as general manager of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Germany. Let me start by picking up what you asked, to say a few words about the organization. AmCham Germany is has been founded in the beginning of the last century, so we're pretty old and rich history on working on our mission to foster transatlantic economic relations and representing our members' interests. We have roughly 1,800 members as AmCham Germany, and really trying to focus on being a platform for our members here on advocating on their interests on policy-related issues, but also on spurring and deepening the transatlantic commercial relations. We do this with 11 regional chapters from Munich to Hamburg and from Düsseldorf to Dresden, where we kind of similarly organize like the ACG with your chapter, Steve, and your organizations and members within the US, where we try to have a strong footprint in the regions. But on the other hand, also organized in 6 policy committees where our members engage in a dialogue together, business related on what are the current challenges and opportunities with regards to different kind of policies, but also engaging in a dialogue with the German government, with European stakeholders, but also with the US administration and political leaders from the US. The 6 policy committees are organized in trade policy, digital policy, energy and climate, healthcare, aerospace and defense, and tax. So AmCham Germany can really provide a platform here for both internal discussion within the sectors and industries and our membership, but also engaging in a dialogue with political stakeholders. And this is also what we did with what you just said, our position paper, which was created over the course of the last months amongst our membership in a sort of comprehensive exercise. We really worked with our members on providing some political positions for this year's event and discussions we would like to engage with. Basically, as an organization, we're obviously very much focused on the 20th of January this year with the new U.S. administration and the expectations which are raised by our members with regards to a new dawn there and the positive perception our members have and expectations with the Biden administration to work on transatlantic issues, but also the 26th of September this year in Germany with the general elections coming up there and the campaign, which is already ongoing, and we have 3 candidates now from the 3 big parties, and laying out their program and their platforms on a couple of policies, which also refer to the business opportunities of our members here in Germany. So we both try to factor this in, and that's why we came up with this position paper a couple of weeks ago, which has the name Revitalizing the Transatlantic Partnership, Expanding Germany's Economic Strength Through Cooperation. And it is, I think, a nice read, and you can really, enjoy reading it. It's very kurzweilig, as we would say in German, with a lot of data visualized, but also a lot of substance and content on specific policy and political issues we're seeing and facing and challenging sort of business environment which needs to be addressed, I think. I will not dig into the details of the paper here. Let me just highlight, I think, 5 points and perceptions I have more generally with regard to the paper and the sort of broader questions we need to address, which will also sort of include the surveys we did amongst our membership on what are the pressing issues for them. As you said, Steve, and a lot of people already said in the transatlantic relations that there is a window of opportunity, of course, for revitalization of the transatlantic economic relations. I think the window is narrow. We have a U.S. administration sort of setting up an agenda, getting things started there on the other side of the Atlantic, but we will also have, at some point over next year, the midterm elections coming up. So the current focus of the U.S. administration, as you know better than I do, is a strong focus on domestic issues, the healthcare sector, but also economy and the social pressing topics the U.S. has. And the administration will address. But also on our side of the Atlantic here in Germany, I think we have a strong focus currently on the fight against the pandemic situation we're facing here in Germany currently with a lockdown and an ongoing sort of dealing with the current situation, factoring in obviously economic and healthcare issues, but also social issues. So also on our side of the Atlantic, it's very much focused on dealing with domestic situation currently. Our members perceived a strong message by US President Biden a couple of times on the fact that America is back. Lately at the Munich Security Conference, where I think he delivered on a couple of points, but also giving the impression that the U.S. would like to work and cooperate with European allies, with Germany and others on global challenges. That's a very positive sign, which is perceived by our members as a sort of important step to revitalize transatlantic economic relations. On the other hand, one might say we would love to hear a little bit more enthusiastic echoes on these messages by the German government or European leaders, that we really, put focus on and work on, strengthening these transatlantic relations right now. So that's very important to say. I think that's why this paper is what we would call a call for action towards the German government to really, spur the discussion within the European Union to be a champion and in transatlantic relations and really, assume a leadership role here on fostering transatlantic relations. There's what we would say, no Bringschuld by the US side. Really, Germany needs to step up here and convey the discussion within the European Union. So that's why we call it a call for action with our paper, to give a more broader sense. So that's number one. Number two is, I think one should not underestimate, and this is also based on the many conversations I had when I was based in Washington, but throughout the US when talking to German companies and company representatives, the need to restore sort of trust in political processes, to the need to restore predictability, to have kind of certainty and political stability, both on political decisions, but processes also in institutions in the US, and also the US as a partner, which a reliable partner within the global framework to really cooperate on addressing global challenges here. And this is really a message which is conveyed by the US administration currently, which is perceived positively. There has been a great uncertainty over the course of the last years on the transatlantic commercial relations, the transatlantic trade policy, and which really needs to be, changed. And there we see a lot of positive signs, I think, from the U.S. administration. But we also need clear and tangible outcomes and progress in our relationship. I think if we want to have the backing both by the public opinion here in Germany, but also in the US, that it is worth that we work together and that it's worth to strengthening the transatlantic relations, because there are a lot of people who are under the impression that there are more options than just the US from the European side or the Europe from the US side. Our members, and this was shown in the Business Barometer, are fully aware that the US is also very much focused on Asia, of course, on China and other regions in the world to work together with. But I do think, and our members think, that in the core of this, the transatlantic relations and the transatlantic cooperation should set the pace for technology, for innovation, for free rules-based trading system, and for standardizations as well. So we really see the core of this pace in the transatlantic relations. Third, I think our members think that there should be an immediate focus on, if you want to say, a conditio sine qua non for the transatlantic relations to reduce any kind of trade barriers. We call for a moratorium on tariffs and on punitive trade measures, and a clear roadmap for elimination of all trade barriers by the EU, if necessary unilaterally, just to convey a positive signal to the US side also that we really would like to work on as a European Union, or that the European Union and its members would really like to work with the US on reducing clearly clearly reducing the trade barriers which have been imposed over the course of the last year, but which have already been in place for many years. So this is really a focus, and an immediate focus of which political leaders, both in Brussels but also in Washington, should have high on their agenda. I think we have a positive signal here with reference to the truth in the Airbus-Boeing case, which is was timely, but it's only, I think 4 months in general. So that's a good positive sign, but there needs to be a sort of a final settlement for this problem, because what some people underestimate, it's not only about, subsidies in the aircraft sector, but it's also about the retaliation, which hurt a lot of, small and medium-sized companies that export both from Germany to the US and the other way around, which are affected by the retaliatory measures there. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, the steel and aluminum tariffs, which are still in place for European imports. We think they need to be lifted immediately, sooner rather than later. I don't know, and we could speak about, the definition of, working with allies by the U.S. administration. Does that mean that they will not pursue the way of using Section 232 tariffs in the future, or removing those who have been imposed, or is it more about providing exemptions for partners and allies, but still using this 232 mechanism there? Anyway, it needs to be addressed that this is, again, still a very huge issue here for the German side as we perceive it, and now for the general transatlantic, trade relations, I think. And at the end of the day, it's also needed not only to speak about tariffs, but also non-tariff barriers. But this would, sort of open up a new discussion here. I just wanted to mention that. Fourth, so if we have the conditio sine qua non to reducing the barriers we have, we really need to focus on enhancing cooperation and have an open and clear and comprehensive discussion on both sides of the Atlantic. Together, where are our interests and where we can work together to strategically, also as sort of a leadership role, to address these global challenges, be it in the healthcare sector to battle the pandemic and the strong need within this sector, and that's what our members tell us, on open markets and reliable sort of free trade environment, which is really needed for this healthcare sector. Other issue within the healthcare sector, of course, the protection of IP, very important in this regard, and of course, potential to speak about and work together transatlantically. I always use this opportunity to highlight that both of our members have a positive signal here. BioNTech and Pfizer having worked together, to not only developing but also producing the vaccine. So this is a positive sign from the business sector, but we really need to follow through this. That there needs to be, some sort of legal and open, and not legal, but reliable and open framework for this sector. Another point of cooperation would be the reforming of the multilateral trading system, the WTO, to strengthening the monitoring and enforcement mechanisms that there for rules-based trade. I think that there another case for leadership role, transatlantic leadership role in building alliances to really reform this body and the format of the WTO. Another point would be digital policy, very important for our members and very pressing and current. I think the need to create some form of transatlantic data space for EU and US companies, which would provide a legal and a secure and sustainable framework and ensure sort of a same level of protection. I think legally secure cross-border transfer of personal data is vital, especially for the export-oriented German economy, but in general for the companies that are active in the transatlantic marketplace. The current situation after the decision of the European Court of Justice has created a lot of legal uncertainty in this regard, and I think that needs to be addressed and needs to be sort of solved politically. We're also in contact with the German government on this pressing issue, together, by the way, with the Federation of German Industries. I think this is a true transatlantic topic, after, Safe Harbor and Privacy Shield and the Schrems II and these decisions, we really need to find a sustainable solution for a data-based, economy, both the strong manufacturing backbone in Germany, but also, with regard to the relations to the US and customers there and service providers. And of course, the big question around China and how to address, challenges there, how to approach and deal with, sort of trade practice on the one hand, but also acknowledge that China is a very important economic partner for, the German economy, but also, a lot of parts US economy, where our members are active also in China, but also in the US, and how the EU will kind of be in this triangle, and how we can work with the US together to have an open dialogue there on where the interests are in Germany and in the EU, but also in the US, to sort of, clear a little bit where we can work together, where we can cooperate, and where we might have different interests, both, in Washington, Brussels, Berlin, or Paris, or elsewhere in Europe. But we need to have an open discussion and a strategic one, which is comprehensive and not only factors in, smaller parts. I think this is needed from our side. The last point I would like to make is more an atmospheric point, maybe, but one thing which is true for all of companies, we have, in our membership, US-owned entities who are active in Germany, but we also have a lot of German companies who are members who are interested in the US as an investment and export locations, but also interested in the transatlantic relations and the sustainability of the transatlantic relations. But all of these companies have one thing in common: they're in global competition. And this message we try to convey over the course of the next months, as we've been doing for many years and months, in the last months, to convey this message to the German government, but also to the political parties who are active now in the campaign on the Chancellor's office at the end of the German Parliament at the end of September in the election, that it is really needed that we understand that there needs to be a focus on creating a favorable business environment. It's urgently needed in Germany, I think, especially if we want to have a rebound after the pandemic, which we're still very much in the pandemic and the situation there. But we really need to address a couple of challenges our member companies see with regard to the business environment here in Germany. And our business barometer showed, and we just released it, as Steve, you said, a lot of concerns about the cost of labor, tax, regulation questions, and energy costs. But what was mostly revealing to me, and there the pandemic really showed again where one of the big challenges for the German business environment is the question of digital infrastructure in Germany. We only have 19% of the members which we asked said that they perceive the digital infrastructure as good or very good, while 57% said it is not good, bad, or less good. So this is really something we need to address here as an American Chamber of Commerce in Germany for our members, because it's vital for the transformation process within the German manufacturing sector. And it is one of the crucial points for our members to look through this prism, on the business location here in Germany. And it's not, about de-investing or something like that. I didn't say that, but I mean, it didn't mean that, but it's really about the concern that at some point, decisions about investments will be made, elsewhere, to invest in other business locations, which can provide this sort of favorable business environment with regards to, for example, the digital infrastructure. And we as AmCham Germany, our mission is to foster, the commercial relationship between the US and Germany, but also, being a voice here and trying to advocate for the business location in Germany, and that our members have the chance what they want to do here: invest, create business, create jobs, having commercial relationship, customer relationship here in Germany, which have been longstanding. So this is the target and the focus of this paper, based on many surveys we do within our membership, and that's what we try to convey over the course of the next weeks and months to come with the parties and party leaders. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to also, provide this message and the content here to your audience, Steve. And again, if you want to dig into the details there, you can also read this paper and find this paper on our website, amcham.de. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. We've actually posted links to both publications in the chat, so people have easy access to that. Daniel, I want to thank you for this overview and for setting the stage for us. You've put a lot on the table, and there are a lot of different directions that we can go in. I was writing down a number of questions, and we've already started to take some questions from our viewers. I'd encourage those of you who want to ask a question to weigh in. I see one hand up, and I will come to that in just a minute. I guess the first question I'd like to ask you, Danya, is You said at the outset that there is a narrow window for shaping the transatlantic trade and investment agenda. Certainly, we've seen in the first 100 days of the Biden administration that there's been a great inward focus dealing with the public health crisis that we're in the midst of, dealing with economic issues, dealing with social justice and racial justice questions. And you talked, of course, about the fact that in Germany, things are somewhat inward looking as well, given the state of the pandemic. But why do you feel that there's a narrow window? Is it really because there's a limited amount of time between the inauguration of President Biden and the next German election, and you don't really know what will happen after that? Or is there something else at play?
So we were just, in the perception we had while talking with a lot of political stakeholders here in Germany, were under the impression that after the election, the presidential election in the U.S. and after the inauguration, that there was some sort of, mood to say, okay, now after, difficult years with the U.S. administration over the course of the last 4 years, now it would be, it would come down to the U.S. administration to reach out to Germany, to reach out to the European Union, to really make the first step there. And I think the Biden administration did what they needed, what they promised to do. But on the other hand, our focus was very much to convey the message to the German government and the leaders there that we here in Germany and the European leaders also need to make a step forward and find sort of common ground to work on pressing issues which we have not been, discussing over the course of the last years. So I think that that this is why we ask for an urgent call for action here, not to wait too long. I mean, we will be in a huge political campaign over the next months here in Germany. After many years of leadership of Angela Merkel, there will be some sort of stronger parties maybe and different candidates which will engage in a debate here in Germany. But we're in the midst of a pandemic situation still in Germany, so there are a lot of factors which could hinder a approach that we would like to see, to work with the U.S. on global challenges. That's why we call this an urgent call for action. And at the end of the day, from a legislative perspective in the U.S., you will also have the midterm elections in 2 years or 1.5 years coming up roughly. So that there will be another focus on sort of more domestic policy, probably. That's why we asked for an urgent call for action.
Thank you. So Daniel, you sort of touched on this already. That obviously the Biden administration has been very vocal in reaffirming its commitment to its allies in trying to strengthen relations, particularly with Europe, even in multilateralism. Right, a couple of the points that you brought up. And you touched on the suspension of tariffs related to the Boeing Airbus conflict, which was a direct result of the conversation that President Biden had with Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Union. But as you alluded to, this is really just a 4-month suspension in the midst of a dispute that goes back over 15 years. And the question that I have is sort of how helpful will that be? It sets a tone, it creates an opportunity to negotiate, but will there really be a permanent solution for the aircraft sector? And I guess the bigger question is, what are the prospects for a new trade deal between the U.S. and the European Union that could come out of that?
Well, I think that based on what we hear, is that this was an important first step, and without this important first step, I wouldn't be so optimistic about this issue. So we have this first step. That's what we ask for on different occasions in our paper, to really, convey positive signals that you want to get things done on both sides of the Atlantic and work on cooperating on global challenges. And this is an important first step, but it's only a first step. And for me, always revealing is while talking to member companies we have, which are medium-sized companies that are very active in the U.S., both as an investment and as an export location, which have been affected also by this dispute and the retaliatory measures. And it's, to some degree, 25% more the tariffs that affect the imports in the U.S. and the exports out of Germany to the U.S. And we're not tired to make this point also here to the political leaders in Germany, but also in Brussels, to say that this needs to be resolved. And that's a positive sign. But of course, there are different other trade-related issues we have. I alluded a little bit to the use of Section 232 for steel and aluminum. There was also at some point some sort of report on 232 and car imports, I think 2 years ago, which thankfully no one really followed up on. And I don't think that this is really a tool which should be used to work with allies, that's at least our perception within, in Brussels or in Berlin. This also needs to be resolved. And then we can, have a compartmentalized approach and talk about different kind of other issues, from the digital service tax to other, trade-related issues to some degree. And I think there's a positive atmosphere, and we should use this, and the political decision makers should use this on both sides of the Atlantic to really get some of the things done which have been imposed over the course of the last year.
Daniel, I'd now like to bring in one of our viewers. We have a member here in New York, Tara Hariharan, who will ask a question. Tara, your mic should be open now.
Yes, thank you so much, Steve. And thank you, Daniel, especially for your comments on global competitiveness issues and where US and China are coming in there. I just wanted to push you further a little bit on two related aspects. First of all, we have been hearing that the Europeans want to, boost this concept of strategic autonomy. And I just wondered what that as a promoter of German business means to you. And how you think that will play into the whole issue of competitiveness, US and China. And related to that, I just wondered how German businesses are thinking about the possibility of diversifying their supply chains, not just out of China as a concept, but even maybe bringing them back home again towards this strategic autonomy push. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tara, for this, both important questions, which are not easy to answer. I think I think the strategic autonomy, especially in the digital sector, in the discussion here in the European Union, was started before I came back to Germany. But we looked at this always from a point of view that, there should be more, that within the trialogue between China and the US, the European Union would have a more sort of a balanced approach and find a, unified voice on a couple of issues and be more independent to some degree, or autonomous with regard to digital policy issues and other issues. So I understand this, where this idea comes from. At the end of the day, looking at the highly connected German economy, globally, connected and multilaterally, with their value chains, reliable on and needed open markets to have a stable business environment here for German businesses. I think there can also be a question how autonomous you can be as such an economy. You really need to be interdependent and work with other countries and have stable supply chain network, which is important. I think this discussion is still open, and the definition of what is strategic autonomy and what needs to be factored in there, and where are the sort of also the challenges with regard to this sort of approach. But in general, we understand, I think, also as an organization, the discussion where it comes from, that there is a strong and unified European voice on a couple of issues which has not been there over the course of the last years and decades. So that's I think where this idea comes from, and this refers also to the second question you made on sort of bringing back value chains and be more resilient. I think that's of course a discussion we had before the pandemic, also in the U.S. on bringing back value chains and renegotiating of trade deals like NAFTA to the USMCA, where the Trump administration tried to bring back value chains and spur production and creating jobs in the U.S. And this has been spurred of course in the pandemic, where it is seen that by a lot of people that the resilience of the value chains is better if they're relocated and brought back and relocalized. We're very much concerned about this discussion, both in the healthcare sector, and I alluded a little bit about this. It's really needed to have open markets and have goods and services and flow easily, so that the market economy can really provide the best solution for the current challenge we have. And I think this is still needed. But I do understand the political discussion around the fact that you want to provide your own population first with goods. I think this is the narrative which is which brings forward these kind of political decisions to speak about restrictions and bringing back value chains there. But at the end of the day, from the business environment I'm currently in here in Germany, I think for the German economy, an open and rules-based trading system where goods can flow easily would be best suited still, both in the healthcare sector and many other sectors as well.
So Daniel, I'd like to perhaps piggyback on Tara's question and ask you, in your interaction both with large US companies that are interested in the German and European market, but also German companies that are interested in the US and the global market that compete globally, as you said. How big a role does China or China policy of the respective governments play in those corporate considerations about transatlantic trade and transatlantic investment?
Well, first of all, again, from a German perspective, where we're here as an organization and our members are active in Germany, I think that I think China is the biggest trading partner for Germany when it comes to trade in goods. But the biggest export market still, I think 4 or 5 years in a row, is the US for the German economy. So this tells you something about the difficult discussion we will have here in Germany on how to deal with one market and the other as a partner, as to some degree a systemic competitor or rival, and on the other hand, a very important economic partner, I think. I don't have a clear answer to your question when it comes to where we're going to end up with this discussion. I think it is needed that we have this discussion with allies on how to deal with certain aspects of the relationship, like the trade practices, and where they should be addressed, in a multilateral framework, for example, the WTO, and there we need some, leadership, transatlantic leadership, that both our markets, the European Union, but also the US, have always been champion for free trade and open markets. And I think what our companies would probably like to see is that we talk about content and substance and policies and regulations, and that we really find a common ground here within the transatlantic relations. That is important, I think. but acknowledging that China is a very important market for our members, both big corporations, by the way, cross-sectoral, but also for a lot of medium and small companies here in Germany, which are our members too, which are obviously very much interested in the US as an investment location. We're very much concerned about or have been concerned about the discussion of a sort of comprehensive strategic decoupling over the course of the last years, which would really, concern the value chains and the reliability and stability of the open market and free trade basis here.
So let me tack on a viewer question, since we're talking about China, and then we'll move on to some other things. One of our viewers is wondering whether governments and companies in the US and Europe should work together to both define but also undertake a, as he describes, strategic moonshot project, such as a Western Silk Road, to provide a sort of counterweight to the Belt and Road Initiative.
I'm not sure if I have a satisfying answer to this from an AmCham Germany perspective. I think what is needed is the transatlantic dialogue, and where we have common interests with regards to sort of trade issues, but also where we differ, and where we have different interests, both here in Germany, in the European Union, and in the US. The truth is that there is no joint approach within the European Union and within the discussion here in Europe between different countries and political stakeholders on how to react on different aspects of the relationship to China and the relationship to the US. So this is also very much of what we need here, and that's what we ask from the German government, to be a champion here to foster this decision-making process within Europe. I think they made some sort of first step with the comprehensive investment agreement with China, late in the German's presidency of the European Council. You can discuss the optics of the timing with regard to the transatlantic relationship there, but again, I think I would be hesitant to answer now a question on geostrategic approaches on Belt and Road Initiative. I think companies are interested in a reliable and open business framework. That's what they are interested in. That's true for our members and true for a lot of other companies who are not yet our members. So I would rather work on that, on the transatlantic relations, than in fostering that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. So let me sort of go in a slightly different direction. You obviously, both of us at the outset talked about climate change and climate policy playing an important role, particularly given that last week Biden held his virtual summit with dozens of world leaders to talk about climate change and what can be done. You brought up the digital infrastructure in Germany and the fact that it is in very poor condition. And of course, the US has been talking about a huge infrastructure bill to try to get the infrastructure in this country up and running again. Both climate policy, infrastructure policy, these are issues that are, of course, of significance on a domestic level, but also on a global level. I'm wondering if you see opportunities for greater German-American collaboration in these fields, and really economic opportunities, not just policy opportunities.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And thanks for asking this question. This is a huge potential for, of course, our members, but companies who are interested in the transatlantic marketplace. Both you alluded to the investment decision, the infrastructure program President Biden wants to pursue, which refer a lot to the energy and climate policy and his agenda there, and the investments they want to do on renewable energies. Still, where German economy is very strong, a lot of businesses have fantastic solutions for these challenges, and so that's a huge potential, I think, for German companies who are interested in the US in this regard. They are already active, but this can really spur more exports, but more investments maybe in the US and more business relations there. So I really see this very positively. On the other hand, you can always see the flip side to the coin of that a lot of companies and our members are concerned about the digital infrastructure in Germany, means that there needs to be some sort of improvement there. And the US companies and US owned entities we have in our membership, but also those companies who have not yet really been active in this market here in Germany, could see this as a huge potential to provide solutions, both with reference to the technical, but also knowledge-based services they could provide here in this discussion. Infrastructure investments needed in Germany as well, both in the digital and the grid sector and other sectors. So this is also huge potential for a lot of businesses in the US with reference to the German market. So I think that we have a lot of positive signs for companies who are trying to bring this forward, and we're trying to speak about those possibilities, which already are, on the screen for a lot of companies, but not yet for everyone. And this provides a lot of potential, I think.
Of course, if we're talking about digital infrastructure, it doesn't take a big leap to start talking about other elements of digital policy. And you touched on it a little bit in your opening remarks. Of course, there are big issues around digital sovereignty for Europe. And this is really one of the sticking points when it comes to data transfer between the United States and Europe, and really a point of contention between both sides of the Atlantic. How do you see that playing out? And I guess perhaps more interesting, how do your members feel about data sharing, and do they have ideas or solutions for how to bring the US and Europe closer together in this regard?
Well, it is a very difficult discussion we will have. We come from different kind of point of views here, transatlantic. I think a lot has been said about our privacy and data protection perspective in Germany, which is true also for the US. For someone who moved to the US 5 years ago and started living in the US, is really fascinating to see that there is a different approach. I think that within the last 5 years, when I was in the US, nothing to do with me personally, but in general, the discussion on privacy and data protection also, I wouldn't say changed fundamentally in the US, but also, became more nuanced maybe. So I think things are moving on both sides of the Atlantic, but we also have to acknowledge here in Germany that, the fight against the pandemic situation and how we kind of follow, track, connections and within the fight of the pandemic, it's really revealed that we also, address challenges with our data, privacy rules and protection rules also in this regard here, when it comes to how we could follow the people who have been infected and could be infectious. So I think that what is needed is that we discuss this with the Americans, the Germans with the Americans, the European side with the American side. What is needed is that we need to resolve this uncertainty, which has been created again and could be created again and again, because there needs to be a political solution, I think, to this problem. And at the end of the day, we think that here our members think that transatlantic data space would be, should be in the core of this discussion, and you could really engage in a discussion with the American side and the German and European side on how this could be sort of created so that we have a stable business and data transfer environment, which is needed for both the digital transformation in Germany, I think, with reference to the manufacturing sector, but also with the importance of the export-oriented German economy. The current status is not sufficient and creates a lot of legal uncertainty for companies. And this was not intended, but that's the situation we're currently facing.
Yeah, that's the way it's played out. So from one sticky wicket, if you will, to another, one of our viewers is curious about your views on Nord Stream 2, which of course is a contentious topic between Germany and the United States, within Germany, between Germany and some of its other neighbors. And this viewer writes, is there a new window of opportunity opening with President Biden to find some sort of a common solution, and I would add, or a compromise when it comes to Nord Stream 2, particularly given that it is so close to completion?
Well, personally, I would say I hope that there is a, sort of a window of opportunity and new possible opportunities to solve this transatlantic or sort of European issue here on how to deal with this matter. From AmCham, we don't really have a position on that. I think that our companies always tell us that they need a reliable energy supply here in Germany, which is also factors in the costs of energy and other dimensions on the one hand. But on the other hand, they really focus on transatlantic cooperation and relations and trying to strengthen those. So in this regard, you somehow need a balanced answer for this question probably, but this is not our core, position on this project itself. I was always stunned by, when I was back in Washington, that this was one of the topics where Congress was very much aligned with the administration, the last administration. So that was not only, sort of a President Trump or a Senator Cruz issue, but it was more a sort of comprehensive and holistic and unified approach there. On the other hand, you have obviously in Europe different kind of perspectives on this project. You also have different perspectives in Germany within the party system on this project. But we, as an organization, don't really engage in this topic. I could only hope for, for the greater good of the transatlantic relations that we find a solution there. We meaning, the U.S. and the European Union and Germany and others.
So, Daniel, I might unfortunately have another question that's sort of a little bit outside of your area of expertise, but one which will be familiar to you. Particularly from your time in Washington, D.C., when you were charting foreign direct investment and job creation in the U.S., in Germany, and to a degree how that was playing out regionally. One of our viewers who's based in Northern Virginia and follows regional developments very closely is curious whether larger German local governments or city-states, whether Hamburg, Berlin, or even places like Stuttgart, map FDI and job creation within their own regions. And as a footnote to that, whether they have metrics for measuring their international economic engagement.
I wish they would have. I'm not quite sure if they have, quite honestly. Based on, and you might remember, Steve, that we worked when I was in Washington, on this project to look into jobs and trade relations on the state-by-state level with German economy. And we always were hoping to find a database on investments, which was not revealed by the era of economic analysis, only about, trade relationship and jobs which are created by foreign-owned entities. I don't think, and I'm not quite sure, you should probably address this question to the GTIE, the Germany Trade and Investment Agency by the Ministry of Economic Affairs, if they really have sort of regional data on or the regional economic developments here on how much is sort of invested and job created by U.S.-owned entities. Would be interesting to see, because I think that one aspect of this and a strong message which was always sent by the data is that the relationship between the states and the communities and other sort of countries and economies is very, very strong and has a long tradition, both in the U.S., but also in Germany, a lot of partnerships between sort of regions and states. So, and this was always a factor for stability in the transatlantic relations, I think. So it would be interesting to see the data there.
So I think the reason why the questions come up is because the data is elusive, and it's hard to come by, as you found during your time here in the U.S. But it's in conversations like these that one recognizes how strong the ties are at the subnational level in terms of foreign direct investment, in terms of job creation, and that there's a wonderful narrative to be told there about how strong the German-American, but indeed the transatlantic relationship is. So as we start to wrap up, let me ask you one last question. During the course of this conversation, words like uncertainty, reliability, confidence, even trust have come up quite a bit. And one of the questions that I find myself being asked over and over again by people that I speak with in Germany and elsewhere in Europe is, how reliable is the United States? With the stroke of a pen, a new president can change policy that was put into place by his predecessor. We saw this with Donald Trump. We've now seen it with Joe Biden. And the question comes up of, how can Europeans and other allies trust the US? And I think that there's a economic and business context to this, but one of our viewers gets a little bit more granular when he writes, regarding Iran and Paris, for example, will Germany insist that the Biden administration secure Senate approval of both of these agreements in order to ensure US commitment to both initiatives? That's more policy, right? And more foreign policy when thinking about the Paris Climate Agreement, when thinking about the JCPOA. But I do think that there's something in there when it comes to these economic ties that we've been talking about. So from your perspective, both as the head of AmCham Germany, but also as your perspective from somebody who has spent, over a decade working on economic policy with corporate leaders, how reliable is the US, and how can Europeans find their trust in the United States once again?
I think this is a very important question, and it sort of puts the finger on a lot of aspects you see in different kind of policies we have with regards to digital policy, trade, commercial relationship, and other energy and climate questions. Of course, one of the viewers asked about Paris and how reliable this is. I think it is very important that political decision makers, by the way, on both sides of the Atlantic and everywhere in the world, understand that business needs reliable framework, especially in these times of great uncertainty where we have a pandemic situation, and this will definitely affect short-term, mid-term, and long-term business models and companies, and how the challenges they face. So political decision makers really need to understand that there is a strong need to whatever they can do from their side to provide any kind of reliability and stability in the commercial relations, in the business relationship, in the business environment is very much needed now more than ever, I think. I am, having been for 5 years in the US, I still am a very positive person and try to push back my German pragmatism and being kind of an upbeat, positive personality here. I think that we have a great momentum here to create a little bit more stability and predictability with this administration. The Biden administration sent out great signals, I think. Also followed through on some of those issues. One is the trade dispute and trade truce in the subsidy sector with the airplane sector. Other examples could be made on that. So I think what we try to convey here in Germany, at least as an organization, is that based on all that we share same values and so forth, this discussion we have been and the speeches we all made on this on these topics, it is very much in the interests, economic interests of Germany and the European Union to have a strong transatlantic alliance. It's not only about values; it's really about interests, I think, and be it the fact that we're the U.S. is the biggest export market for German economy, but also on other policies and that define the relationship to the U.S. It is very much in the interest of Germany, and that's why we're really looking forward to this window of opportunity to creating a better and revitalize the transatlantic relationship. Representatives within the Biden cabinet stand, I think, personally also for this message the president and the vice president conveyed on being, being back, America is back, and on the global scale. But it's really also from a German economy and our membership perspective, it's very much needed to create reliability and stability.
Well, Daniel Andrich, I want to thank you for spending this hour with us, for sharing the findings and key takeaways from these two recent publications from AmCham Germany with us and with our viewers. As you said, I think it's good to end on a positive note. There are a lot of opportunities out there, but I think the biggest challenge and the most pressing challenge is to come to terms with the COVID-19 pandemic. And once we've all been vaccinated and it's safe to travel again, hopefully some of these other elements will pick up more quickly as well. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to engage in person with you again.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this. Thanks, Steve, for having me. Thanks, everyone at the ACG for the great work you're doing on the transatlantic relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Herzlichen Dank, Daniel.
Alles gut. Schöne Grüße nach New York. Danke.